Why would God make people gay?
Christians may be headed towards disaster if they can't answer this one question. Check this out.
You say that if I'm going to be a Christian again, then I need to repent from being LGBTI+. You have no idea. You have blood on your hands.
This question is making Christians leave in droves because of the increased tension between the LGBT community and the Christian community.
The children of anti-demonstrators trampled on flags in front of a school.
He's the first openly pastor in the Presbyterian Church.
With people in the LGBT community saying that this is the modern-day civil rights issue of our lifetime. And Christians need to embrace and affirm their lifestyle, which leaves many Christians conflicted on how to engage with this exact issue.
There was a couple older ladies who went in, didn't know there was protests happening. I don't think they were on one side or the other, but they were so scared to go out front, we had to sneak them out the back.
And the brash behavior and emotionally charged topic is leaving many Christians completely afraid to speak out on this topic in fear of losing their jobs, losing their businesses, or losing their platform.
A Colorado baker who refused on religious grounds to make a cake celebrating a same-sex wedding.
And to be fair, this is a very difficult conversation to engage in. I mean, look at Matt Walsh, who's very confident in his work regarding the T issue, but when pressed by Joe Rogan about the L and the G, he kind of falls apart.
Why would God make people gay if he didn't want them to engage in gay sex?
All people have proclivities or towards different sins, different things that we would call sins.
But it doesn't seem that Christians are completely innocent. Groups like the Westboro Baptists have made a name and become renowned for their harsh tone and acts and words towards folks in the pro-choice and the LGBT community.
In a recent sermon, the Baptist pastor Charles Worley suggested gays and lesbians should be imprisoned behind an electric fence.
And we see this tension culminate and really flare up at one of Frank Turek's recent Q&As. Now, if you don't know who Frank Turek is, he's a Christian apologist that welcomes dialogue with people from all backgrounds. Check out this intense interaction. And can you spot which parts of the argument are reasonable and which parts of the argument are completely benign?
Why do you say that if I'm going to be a Christian again, then I need to repent from being LGBTI+ and then accept this narrow version of the gospel? That to me is like conversion therapy, and the UN and all these other major medical organizations in the US and around the world have called that torture. So for you to stand here and to defend that, that's pretty messed up.
There is no objective moral standard unless some kind of God exists. Everything is just a matter of human opinion. And so when you hold up a sign that says that certain people have treated people wrongly,
they have, and there's so much evidence for it.
Mav, you might be exactly right about that. But
I know I am. I have experiences and data to back it up.
Okay, well, I'm sorry that people have treated you poorly. But
you don't have to go on and spread these bigoted viewpoints on YouTube and Facebook like you do. It's just a bunch of misinformation. You have no idea.
Mav,
you have blood on your hands.
Okay, Mav. Do you want to have a conversation, or you just want to...
No, I really just would like you to just apologize and turn around and see that what you're doing is harmful.
Mav, there's only harm if God exists. Harm is only evil if God exists. And so you're stealing...
harm regardless if God exists or not.
Thank you, Mav. You're not interested. Thank you for coming. I appreciate people coming here who have a different point of view, but it's got to be a dialogue. It can't be a monologue.
Now, it's important to note that the person who is engaging with Frank Turek here is more of an activist, and we don't want to allow activists or the folks on the fringes to create a false perception of what the entire group represents. In the same way, we wouldn't want the Westboro Baptists to represent all Christians, is in the same way, we have to take what these LGBT activists are saying with a grain of salt. Listen, I would argue that the vast majority of folks in the LGBT community just want to be left alone. They're not out to tell all Christians how they have blood on their hands. They're not trying to get into fights. They just want to be left alone. And some of you may be shocked to find that there are folks in the LGBT community that find a lot of common ground with Christians. For example, David Rubin, who is very hospitable and welcoming and celebratory of the things that come out of a Christian worldview.
Culture would tell you that religious people are the most dogmatic and everything else. But again, I have consistently found, usually evangelical Christians, to be quite honest, the most open and decent, but religious people by and large.
And I would say most Christians aren't going out of their way to say hateful things to LGBT folks. They just don't want their religion attacked as being bigoted, and they don't want their kids to be exposed to over-sexualized content or taught things that they don't feel is appropriate or aligned with their values. But there's that dirty word again, Christian values. Are these values actually immoral? Do Christians actually have blood on their hands? Is there some degree of responsibility that we have to carry towards the treatment of LGBT people historically? So let's engage in this question and if these values are actually immoral. Frank Turk makes the argument that you can't have morality without first God. And I would agree with Frank Turk. But I think in order to have a discussion on this, to diffuse that Christians aren't just out here flippantly doing things to be harmful towards folks from the LGBT community, we have to do something that Christians are often uncomfortable with, which is formulate an argument without using the Bible on this exact topic. So let's formulate this argument. But first, imagine there's two plants, plant A and plant B. Both of these plants are in desperate need of water. Plant A gets the recommended 8 ounces of water. Plant B gets 64 ounces of water. Plant B dies. Both plants needed water. Both plants wanted water, but one survived and one died. And this is the premise of utilitarian ethics, which basically says that the outcomes determine whether something is right or wrong. It's the view that the most ethical or moral choice is the one that creates the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. So the assumption is that both plants wanted and needed water. However, too much water ended up killing one of the plants. The initial presupposition that both plants could use as much water as they could get their hands on was going to lead to the most amount of good for both plants was false. But if you were to peel away at just a little bit of the data, which I can't get too deep into, in terms of men in the LGBT community being 40 times more likely to contract a very specific virus that shall remain unknown, or that women who are a part of the LGBT community are twice as likely to experience intimate partner violence than heterosexual women, one could make the argument that based on the outcomes, the utilitarian outcomes of both of those stats alone, that this does not lead to the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. Now, what I'm not saying is that you have to agree with me. I'm just saying that there's enough there that someone can make an argument outside of using the Bible that this does not lead to human flourishing or the greatest good for the greatest number of people, which leads us to another way to dissect this conversation. We all know that thieves exist and robbery is a thing. People breaking into someone's home, someone stealing an old lady's purse, but these situations by and large make up the minority of the population, meaning that these things don't happen that often. It's a very few amount of people that do the majority of these types of crimes. And you could argue that your life has never been affected by the small amount of people who commit these acts. But check out some of this footage when people started to loot their cities in droves. Some of you guys may remember this. And this is the premise of Immanuel Kant's view of ethics. This would be called deontological ethics. If something is right or wrong, it is always right or wrong. Now, the funny thing is Kant actually argued all of these things in response to the Bible. And he came to this conclusion of the categorical imperative, in which the first formulation of it is act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Meaning this, what would happen to society if everyone decided to steal? Well, society would collapse. We would see anarchy in the streets like we did in those videos of people looting and rioting. So if we were to take this categorical imperative to its logical end regarding this issue, what would happen if everyone in society decided to participate in LGBT relationships and that was exclusively the way they lived their life? Well, we wouldn't be able to reproduce ourselves as a species. Human civilization within a generation or two would completely cease to exist. So these two secular approaches to morality and ethics prove that the Christian position on this specific topic isn't something that's morally bankrupt or causes harm. Now, there's two things that I want to be very upfront about, both to the Christian and the LGBT community. First, Christians. We shouldn't be known just for the things that we are against. Some of us want to be jerks for Jesus and then slap persecution on it and think it's okay, when honestly, our demeanor and our way of talking to people and treating people can just be unhelpful. How we say things is just as important as why we say things and what we're saying. Meaning this: pockets of the church have not done a great job of extending dignity and treating people from the LGBT community with respect. In this area, I think we could do better. Now, the LGBT community. It's important for you to understand that the vast majority of Christians don't want to see you hurt, don't want to see you have your rights stripped away, don't want to see you going through life and getting picked on or attacked or bullied. But to dismiss all Christians as bigoted for standing on ancient truth from antiquity, after I've just explained to you other secular ways of coming to the same conclusion, I would hope that you would not make the intellectually lazy argument that we are just full of hate and bigotry and want to see people ripped of their rights. Let me assure you that the vast majority of Christians don't mean any harm to you. We just want to be left alone, and we just want to control the things that our kids are taught. We could disagree on this issue. We can disagree on whether or not this specific behavior is in line with God's natural law while extending dignity and grace to each other. You do not have to agree with our worldview, but we've come to the conclusion that the Christian paradigm in and of itself is absolutely not morally bankrupt, and I would argue brings the most amount of flourishing to the most amount of people, even though God's design does call and come with some restraint. And that restraint is that all followers of Jesus would lay down their lives, pick up their cross, and follow Jesus. And that word life in the original Greek means psyche. That those of us that choose to follow Jesus would lay down our own mentality about what we think is best and submit what the scriptures teaches God's view is. But if you don't believe me that following Jesus leads to flourishing, I would challenge you, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, commit to pressing in to prayer and consistently reading the Bible for 90 days and tell me if it doesn't leave you completely transformed. And we've created a free resource for you guys. It's our Bless God PDF prayer journal. You can get that at blessgodpdf.shop completely for free. And it has the same exact fonts that I've been using for years to help me grow in the spiritual discipline of prayer.